Thank you. That was lovely. Our first words for reflection this morning are excerpts from The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. It is from a letter Baldwin wrote to his 15-year-old nephew, who was also named James. Other people cannot see what I see whenever I look into your father's face. For behind your father's face, as it is today, are all those other faces which were his. No one's hand can wipe away those tears he sheds invisibly today, which one hears in his laughter and in his speech and in his songs. I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he survived it. And I know, which is much worse, and this is the crime of which I accuse my countrymen, for which neither I nor time nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. We have not stopped trembling yet, but if we had loved each other, if we had not loved each other, none of us would have survived. And now you must survive because we love you, and for the sake of your children and your children's children. You were born where you were born and faced the future that you faced because you were black and for no other reason. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity, and in as many ways as possible, that you were a worthless human being. Wherever you have turned, James, in your short time on this earth, you have been told where you can go and what you could do and how you could do it and where you could live and whom you could marry, but trust your experience. Know whence you came. If you know whence you came, there's really no limit to where you can go. The details and symbols of your life have been deliberately constructed to make you believe what white people say about you. Please try to remember that when they believe as well as what they do and cause you to endure does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and fear. We, with love, shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done things here and will again, and we can make America what America must become. It will be hard, James, but you come from men who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of the most terrifying odds, achieved the unassailable and monumental dignity.
Missing Voices by Connie Simon. When I started attending a UU church, I was excited by the promise of worship that would draw from the arts, science, nature, literature, and a multitude of voices. Indeed, some of the voices that the Unitarian Universalists hear in worship each week belong to Thoreau, Emerson, Ballou, and others. Their words are beautiful, but they come from a culture and experience that's foreign to me. When do I get to hear voices from my culture? I quickly learned that other than for the same few quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. and Howard Thurman's The Work of Christmas, it wasn't going to happen. I sit attentively and listen with my head to their voices, while my heart longs to hear more of our voices. I am a Black woman. When I look around on Sunday morning, I don't see many people who look like me. In most of the congregations I visit, I don't see anybody who looks like me. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised that I don't hear voices of people who share my experience. But it still hurts. I want to hear voices that tell the struggle of living under the weight of oppression in this culture of white supremacy. I want to hear stories of trying to stay afloat in the water we swim in. I want to hear voices of living while Black in America. I don't hear these voices in UU churches, so I have to supplement my worship by reading Black theologians like Anthony Penn and Monica Coleman. I read Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, and my favorite poet, Paul Laurence Dunbar. Though not a Unitarian or a Universalist, Dunbar chronicled the African American experience in the years following the Civil War and the emancipation of the enslaved Africans. A time of opportunities for blacks as we migrated north in droves seeking employment and education, but also a time of continuing segregation, racism, and oppression. Dunbar acknowledged this tension in his writing. We hear him long for joy and prosperity, while at the same time knowing that the system would conspire to keep true happiness just beyond his grasp. A pint of joy to a peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but the moans come double, and that is life. Still, he was a champion of social justice, believing that God has sympathy for the plight of the oppressed and that his grace will be bestowed not on those who soar, but they who plod their rugged way upheld to God. For Dunbar, the struggle was real. 100 years later, hearing Dunbar express his frustration and give voice to the contradictions of our existence as African Americans encourages me and nourishes my soul. His voice speaks to my heart. He knows my pain and understands my sadness, my fear, my rage. He understands the tears I cry as I pray for the strength to get through another day in this world. He gives voice to my deep faith that real change is coming someday. He didn't see it in his lifetime, and I may not see it in mine, but I have to keep believing it's possible. That's the message many African Americans long to hear in church. I know that's what I need to hear every now and then. Will it ever happen? Or will we always have to go outside to hear our voices? If that's the case, maybe there's no place for us in Unitarian Universalism. The thought of leaving is painful, but so is being in a faith that ignores our voices.
My ancestors immigrated to the United States from Germany. Their granddaughter was my grandmother, Martha. This is her ring. As a denomination, we also have ancestors. From this very pulpit last week, Reverend Patrick talked about the 1648 Cambridge Platform and its legacy of covenant that we still share to this day. A few years before that, in 1630, Massachusetts Bay Colony Governor John Winthrop, encountering stormy seas on his voyage from England, spoke of covenant while aboard his ship, the Arbella. Winthrop told his shipmates that, to avoid this shipwreck, we must be knit together. I imagine him standing like on this rocking with the rain coming in. He's saying, we must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must bear one another's burdens. Winthrop's statue stands proudly outside the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Boston. But, according to UU historian Dan McCannon, 4 years after the Arbella speech, the first Africans were brought into Massachusetts as slaves. And 4 years after that, Winthrop himself recorded in his diary a shipment of slaves from Barbados. Lindsay taught our children about slavery in Baltimore, but in 1641, a document ironically titled The Body of Liberties formally legalized slavery in the colony. It was the first of the colonies in North America to do so. As the founding church of the colony, First Church was undoubtedly deeply involved in all of these events. So much for bearing one another's burdens. Yes, our denomination has had resilience through the generations. Yes, my own family has stories of resilience. But my family, and every white family in this congregation, has resilience that has benefited from white privilege, and specifically benefited from the labor of African chattel slaves. On the other hand, the intergenerational resilience of African Americans has persisted without this benefit and despite this history. Eileen read to us from the poet Audre Lorde, who said that we were not meant to survive. She read from James Baldwin as he claims survival, claims love, and claims an America for his nephew, despite the hatred that they both received as black men. And Vendra Flata read from UU Minister Connie Simon, claiming African American voices within, I shouldn't say claiming, hoping for African American voices within the Unitarian Universalist denomination. And finally, Nicole Hannah-Jones, the founder of the 1619 Project, which is an ongoing initiative from the New York Times Magazine that began last August, the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. The project aims to reframe our country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. February is African American History Month, so rather than telling you more about my own family's resilience, I'm going to spend the rest of my time here reading the words of Nicole Hannah-Jones. And if you could bring, thank you. You were on it, Mark. My dad always flew an American flag in our front yard, says Hannah-Jones. The blue paint on our two-story house was perennially chipping. The fence, or the rail by the stairs, or the front door, existed in a perpetual state of disrepair, but that flag always flew, pristine. Our corner lot, which had been redlined by the federal government, was along the river that divided the black side of the town from the white side, our Iowa town. At the edge of our lawn, high on an aluminum pole, soared the flag, which my dad would replace as soon as it showed the slightest tatter. In 1962, at age 17, he signed up for the Army. Like many young men, he joined in hopes of escaping poverty. But he went into the military for another reason as well, a reason common to black men. Dad hoped that that if he served his country might finally treat him as an American. The Army did not end up being his way out. He was passed over for opportunities, his ambition stunted. He would be discharged under murky circumstances and then labor in a series of service jobs for the rest of his life. Like all the black men and women in my family, he believed in hard work. But like all the black men and women in my family, no matter how hard he worked, he never got ahead. So when I was young, that flag outside our home never made sense to me. How could this black man, having seen firsthand the way his country abused black Americans, how it refused to treat us as full citizens, proudly fly its banner? I didn't understand his patriotism. It deeply embarrassed me. I had been taught in school, through cultural osmosis, that the flag wasn't really ours, that our history as a people began with enslavement, and that we had contributed little to this great nation. It seemed the closest thing black Americans could have to cultural pride was to be found in our vague connection to Africa, a place we had never been. That my dad felt so much honor in being an American felt like a marker of his degradation, his acceptance of our subordination. Like most young people, I thought I understood so much, when in fact I understood so little. My father knew exactly what he was doing when he raised that flag. He knew that our people's contributions to building the richest and most powerful nation in the world were indelible, that the United States simply would not exist without us. Conveniently left out of our founding mythology is the fact that one of the primary reasons the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. By 1776, Britain had grown deeply conflicted over its role in the barbaric institution that had reshaped the Western Hemisphere. In London, there were growing calls to abolish the slave trade. This would have upended the economy of the colonies in both the North and the South. The wealth and prominence that allowed Jefferson, at just 33, and the other founding fathers to believe they could successfully break off from one of the mightiest empires in the world came from the dizzying profits generated by chattel slavery. In other words, we may never have revolted against Britain if the founders had not understood that slavery empowered them to do so, nor if they had not believed that independence was required in order to ensure that slavery would continue. It was not incidental that 10 of this nation's first 12 presidents were enslavers, and some might argue that this nation was founded not as a democracy, but as a slaveocracy. 12.5 million Africans were kidnapped from their homes and brought in chains across the Atlantic Ocean in the largest forced migration in human history until the Second World War. Almost 2 million did not survive the grueling journey known as the Middle Passage. And before the abolishment of the international slave trade, 400,000 enslaved Africans would be sold into America. Those individuals and their descendants transformed the lands to which they've been brought into some of the most successful colonies in the British Empire. Through backbreaking labor, they cleared the land across the southeast. They taught the colonists to grow rice. They grew and picked the cotton that at the height of slavery was the nation's most valuable commodity, accounting for half of all American exports and 66% of the world's supply. They built the plantations of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, sprawling properties that today attract thousands of visitors from across the globe, captivated by the history of the world's greatest democracy. They laid the foundations of the White House and the Capitol, even placing with their unfree hands the Statue of Freedom atop the Capitol dome. They lugged the heavy wooden tracks of the railroads that crisscrossed the South and helped take the cotton they picked to the northern textile mills, fueling the Industrial Revolution. They built vast fortunes for white people, north and south. At one time, the second richest man in the nation was a Rhode Island slave trader. Profits from black people's stolen labor helped the young nation pay off its war debts and finance some of our most prestigious universities. It was the relentless buying, selling, insuring, and financing of their bodies and the products of their labor that made Wall Street a thriving banking, insurance, and trading sector, and New York City the financial capital of the world. The United States is a nation founded on both an ideal and a lie. Our Declaration of Independence, approved on July 4, 1776, proclaims that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. But the white men who drafted those words did not believe them to be true for the hundreds of thousands of black people in their midst. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness did not apply to fully 1/5 of the country. Yet, despite being violently denied the freedom and justice promised to all, black Americans believe fervently in the American creed. Through centuries of black resistance and protests, we have helped the country live up to its founding ideals, and not only for ourselves. Black rights struggles paved the way for every other rights struggle, including women's, including gay rights, and disability rights, and immigrant rights. Black Americans have also been and continue to be foundational to the idea of American freedom. More than any other group in this country's history, we have served generation after generation in an overlooked but vital role. It is we who have been the perfecters of this democracy. Without the idealistic, strenuous, and patriotic efforts of black Americans, our democracy today would most likely look very different, and it might not be a democracy at all. The very first person to die for this country in the American Revolution was a black man who himself was not free. Crispus Attucks was a fugitive from slavery, yet he gave his life for a new nation, in which his own people would not enjoy the liberties laid out in the Declaration for another century. In every war this nation has waged since that first one, black Americans have fought. Today, we are the most likely of all racial groups to serve in the United States military. My father, she's saying, One of those many black Americans who answered the call knew what it would take me years to understand, that the year 1619 is as important to the American story as 1776, that black Americans, as much as these men cast in alabaster in the nation's capital, are this nation's true founding fathers, and that no people has a greater claim to that flag than us. No one cherishes freedom more than those who have not had it. And to this day, black Americans, more than any other group, embrace the democratic ideals of a common good. We are the most likely to support programs like universal health care and a higher minimum wage, and to oppose programs that harm the most vulnerable. For instance, black Americans suffer the most from violent crime, and yet we are the most opposed to capital punishment. Our unemployment rate is nearly twice that of white Americans, yet we are still the most likely of all groups to say this nation should take in refugees. The truth is that, as much democracy in this nation as this nation has today, it has been born on the backs of black resistance. Our founding fathers may not have actually believed in the ideals they espoused, but black people did. For generations, we have believed in this country with a faith it did not deserve. Black people have seen the worst of America, yet somehow we still believe in its best. Amen, and blessed be.